Emily Carter had always believed that leaving Grayhaven would mean leaving behind the shadows of her childhood. Yet as the bus rattled over the worn bridge into town, the fog rolled in to greet her, heavy and damp, like an old memory pressing against her skin. It clung to the windows, blurred the coastline, and painted everything in shades of gray. The town hadn't changed. At least, not on the surface. The same clapboard houses huddled along the shoreline, paint peeling from years of salt air. The same bait shop leaned crookedly near the pier, nets piled like forgotten promises. Even the air smelled the same, brine and old wood, with a faint sweetness of clover that reminded her of summers long gone. But Emily wasn't here for nostalgia. She wasn't here for the town's memories. She was here because of Evelyn. Her grandmother's death had left a hollow ache she hadn't expected. Evelyn had been a complicated woman, sharp-tongued, private, often more mystery than family. But she had been Emily's anchor in ways Emily hadn't realized until she was gone. When the lawyer handed Emily the single folded note left behind, scrawled in Evelyn's elegant but shaky hand, it unsettled her more than the funeral itself. The lighthouse holds what I could not say. That was all. No explanations. No comfort. Just a riddle. The bus hissed to a stop near the old square, and Emily stepped out into the mist. Grayhaven watched her as it always did, with wary, curious eyes. The few locals who lingered outside the diner or hardware store paused to glance at her. Recognition flickered, then whispers followed. "Is that Evelyn's granddaughter? She looks just like her. Why would she come back here now?" Emily ignored them, adjusting her coat and pulling her bag higher on her shoulder. She had grown used to being an outsider, even here, where her roots were deepest. Her father had left Grayhaven when she was 8, taking her with him, determined to never return. She had thought she was done with this place. But Evelyn's words had pulled her back, like a tide she couldn't resist. She rented a room at the Driftwood Inn, a small 2-story house turned lodging, run by a woman named Mabel who had known Evelyn for decades. The room was simple: white curtains, a brass bed frame, a view of the harbor where gulls circled and boats rocked gently. Emily unpacked only what she needed. She wasn't planning on staying long. Just long enough to find answers. Still, the silence of the room pressed in. She wandered down to the docks, letting the rhythm of the sea ground her. The water slapped against the pylons, ropes creaked, and somewhere a bell buoy tolled like a heartbeat. Across the bay, rising above jagged black cliffs, she saw it, the Grayhaven Lighthouse. Even in daylight it seemed to brood. Its tower climbed into the mist, stone darkened by time, the lantern chamber standing like a watchful eye. The light was dead, extinguished years ago, the town claimed, but it still dominated the horizon. Emily shivered. The lighthouse was the key. She felt it in her bones. Later that evening, she entered the harbor diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the fog. The smell of fried fish and strong coffee wrapped around her. Locals sat in their usual booths, their conversations faltering when she walked in. She ordered clam chowder and ate in silence, trying not to notice the stares. Mayor Ruth Holloway, a stout woman with silver hair pulled tight, approached her table. "Emily Carter," she said flatly, not a question but a statement. Emily nodded, bracing herself. "Mayor Holloway. It's been a long time." Not long enough, some would say. The mayor's eyes softened, though her tone didn't. "Your grandmother was important here. But she carried her secrets to the grave. Best to let them stay buried." Emily set her spoon down. "She wanted me to come here. She wanted me to find something. Or she wanted you to stay away from it." The mayor leaned closer. "Don't go near that lighthouse. It's cursed. Always has been. Let it rest." And with that, she walked away, leaving Emily's chowder untouched and her heart pounding. The cliffs called to her that night. The path was narrow, winding through wind-bent pines, the sea roaring below. The lighthouse grew larger with each step, its shadow stretching across the rocks like a warning. She half expected the lantern to flare to life, but it stood cold, dark, silent. At least until she reached the door. It creaked open before she touched it. And standing there, framed in the faint glow of an oil lamp, was Daniel Hale. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar. His clothes were rugged, worn by salt and weather. His eyes, though, were the most striking, storm gray, unreadable, and sharp enough to pin her in place. "This isn't a place for visitors," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of command. "I'm not a visitor," Emily replied, steadier than she felt. "I'm Evelyn Carter's granddaughter." Something flickered across his face. Recognition. But just as quickly he shuttered it. "You should leave." Emily bristled. "Not until I know why she sent me here. She left me a note. About this place." He studied her for a long moment, then stepped back, allowing her inside. The air was thick with oil, salt, and something older, something like history pressing against the walls. The spiral staircase rose above them, shadows dancing in the lamplight. "This lighthouse doesn't belong to you," he said quietly. "Or to me. It belongs to Grayhaven. And it keeps what should never be set free." Emily's skin prickled. "What does that mean?" Daniel only looked at her, eyes both warning and weary. "It means your grandmother knew more than she ever should have. And if you're wise, you'll walk away now." But Emily didn't move. She couldn't. The pull of the place was too strong. And then, as if in defiance of Daniel's words, the lantern above them flared to life. The glass chamber glowed brilliantly, casting beams across the foggy sea. Emily gasped, spinning to see it. Daniel swore under his breath, bolting up the stairs. But when he reached the top, he was alone. No one else was there. Emily's heart thundered in her chest. The light burned, though no hand had touched it. And for the first time, she realized the truth. The lighthouse was alive. And it had been waiting for her. Morning arrived in Grayhaven as if poured from a pewter pitcher, cool, thick, and slow. Fog slid between the houses and lay across the harbor like a heavy blanket, muting the colors of lobster traps and peeling hulls to the same quiet gray. Emily woke to the cry of gulls and the faint clang of a buoy, the sounds threading through her dreams until she blinked into wakefulness. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the smell of salt and old wood, the scratch of the driftwoodin's quilt, and the weight of Evelyn's note returned all at once. She lay still, listening, and felt the pull of the lighthouse like a tide tugging the shore. She dressed in jeans and a wool sweater, fingers lingering on the notebook she'd placed on the bedside table, its first page filled with looping, restless questions from last night. A curiosity flickered inside her, sharp and bright, despite everything. She'd seen the lantern blaze on its own. She'd watched Daniel sprint up those stairs and return with nothing but furrowed worry and clipped words. She needed answers, and if he wouldn't give them freely, she would learn the lighthouse's language herself. She was, after all, a journalist. Persistent was the polite word people used for her. Downstairs, Mabel was polishing the brass letters on a framed photograph from the inn's opening day. The woman's gentle features were folded by years into kindness. "You didn't sleep much," she observed, not unkindly. "The walls tell me things. They creak when a guest carries too many thoughts." "Then they must be rattling," Emily said, forcing a small smile. "Mabel, did you ever go out to the lighthouse? Before it shut down, I mean." Mabel's cloth stilled. For a heartbeat, the clink of cups from the kitchen and the distant clang of the buoy were the only sounds. "When I was a girl," she said softly. "School trip. The keeper then was a Hale. They're always Hales, somehow. Or so the old folks say." She met Emily's eyes. "You ought to leave it be. Your grandmother tried, and look what it cost her." Emily's throat tightened. What did it cost her? But Mabel only sighed, folded her cloth, and pushed a mug of coffee across the counter. "A hot cup before the fog seeps into your bones." The diner across the square had its windows fogged with condensation, and the bell above the door gave a weary ring when Emily stepped inside. The same faces from last night were sprinkled across the booths, the same shoulders huddled over plates, the same unhurried murmur of morning. Mayor Ruth Holloway sat at the counter with a newspaper she pretended to read while keeping one eye on the room. Emily took a stool 2 seats down and ordered toast and eggs. "You're still here," the mayor said after a long moment, the words as much observation as challenge. "I am," Emily answered, keeping her tone even. "I'm looking for the truth." That's what I do. Ruth folded the paper with careful precision. Truth is a luxury in a town that has to live with the same 20 faces, winter after winter. We survive on manners, on looking the other way, on telling ourselves stories we can stand. Some truths don't fit in a place like this. Then maybe the story needs a bigger room, Emily said. And maybe reading it out loud is how you get free. The mayor's mouth pressed into a thin line that could have been respect or irritation. Emily couldn't tell. You've got your grandmother's stubbornness, Ruth said finally. It made her useful. It also made her dangerous. She laid a few bills on the counter and stood. If you go to the Lighthouse, be polite to Daniel. He's kept it from breaking us. Breaking you? Emily asked. What is it? Ruth didn't answer. She put a hand on Emily's shoulder, surprisingly gentle, and left, the bell above the door chiming a soft, final warning. The path to the cliffs was narrower in daylight, though no less treacherous. Moisture slicked the pine needles underfoot, and the fog trimmed everything to a limited palette. Charcoal rocks, pewter sea, milk-white air. The lighthouse rose out of it like an old sentinel, unblinking. As Emily approached, she noticed details she'd missed last night, the web of hairline cracks along the stone, the way lichen patterned the lower blocks, the metal railing on the gallery, blackened by time and salt. The door was shut tight, the iron latch cold under her hand. She knocked. Metal rang softly under her knuckles. There was a pause, then the faint scrape of a lock. The door opened a crack, and Daniel's eyes appeared in the dim slit, gray, assessing, guarded. You came back, he said. The light came on, she replied. I want to know how. He opened the door wider. He wore the same rugged coat, a cable-knit sweater beneath it, the kind of clothes that had made themselves at home on his frame. His hair looked a shade darker in the gloom, and there was a sandpaper hush to his unshaven jaw. If she'd met him in a city, she might have assumed he was one of those men who did difficult, necessary jobs quietly and without complaint. An EMT, a bridge worker, the guy who climbed towers in storms when no one else would. Here, he was the keeper of an empty light. And somehow that felt like all of those jobs at once. I told you not to come, he said, stepping aside so she could enter. But telling you things doesn't seem to stop you. That's clear. I don't respond well to go away, she said. It's a character flaw. It's a survival flaw here. He brushed past her, moving toward the workbench against the stone wall. The lighthouse interior was taller than she remembered in her childhood, the spiraling steps vanishing into a dim brightness above. The air smelled of metal and oil, damp rope and old storms. Tools were hung in orderly rows. A logbook lay open to a page with neat handwriting and columns of dates. What are you repairing? Emily asked, peering at the lens assembly on the bench. The shutters, he said, not looking up. Salt eats everything. When to? Even when there's no schedule to keep any more, the machines remember that they used to matter. They still like to be tended. There was something unexpectedly tender in the way he spoke about gears and glass, as if the mechanism were a living thing that needed patience and steady hands. It softened him for a moment, this attention that felt like care. You keep all this running, Emily said. For what? Daniel finally met her eyes. For when it's needed. She waited. By ships. Sometimes. His mouth quirked, an expression that could have been humor or bitterness. And sometimes by other things. Other things, she repeated. Like the past. Like the past. His gaze flicked to the stairs as if he'd heard something. She followed his look but saw only shadow and the dull gleam of the iron rail. Emily set her notebook on the edge of the workbench. You knew my grandmother. It wasn't a question, but a stone tossed into still water to see what rings moved. Daniel's hands stilled over the delicate shutter he was aligning. Everyone knew Evelyn, he said quietly. Grayhaven is small. Not like that. Emily stepped closer, the old wooden boards whispering under her weight. When I said her name last night, something changed in your face. She wrote about this place. About a man she couldn't name. About secrets. He pressed his lips together, then exhaled. Evelyn was brave. Braver than most. Brave in ways that can get a person hurt. And you? Emily asked. Are you brave? He looked at her as if measuring the truth behind her question, as if he could feel the edges of it beneath his fingers. You practiced. Practiced at what? Keeping watch. He gestured toward the stairs. Come on. The climb wound her inward, step after step. The spiral was narrow, the iron cool, the walls carrying echoes of their footfalls. A window cut into the stone offered a slit of sea and sky and fog, and for a heartbeat Emily saw herself reflected in the glass, pale, intent, mouth set. There she was, the person who never knew when to stop pulling on a thread. She felt something like heat at the back of her neck, as if the lighthouse itself were breathing. At the lantern room, glass surrounded them like the facets of a giant jewel. The lens assembly, tall, precise, almost extravagant, hugged the central burner with a geometry that was both mechanical and beautiful. Emily reached out to touch a brass rail, only to stop when Daniel said, "Don't. The oil can slick, and the glass remembers every hand. You talk like it's alive." "It is," he said simply. "Everything is when you listen long enough." She moved carefully around the room, taking in the way the fog pressed its body against the glass. From here, Grayhaven was a suggestion. Rooftops softened to shapes, boats smudged to strokes of charcoal. The sea near the base of the cliffs was a muscled animal, gray-green and restless. "The light wasn't on when I left last night," Daniel said, more to the lens than to her. "I doused it. Always do. There are rules to follow." "It came on," Emily said. "No one touched it. It woke." He nodded. The chords of his throat shifted, and for a moment his eyes looked older than his face, gray heavy with years she couldn't count. "Sometimes it answers a call," he said. "Sometimes it calls back." "What did it answer last night?" He studied her, and she felt the odd sensation of being seen and weighed, not just for her questions but for her reasons. "Grief is a kind of weather," he said. "You brought a storm with you." The words landed with more precision than she liked. It was true, grief had made her sharp and untender, had turned the world into something to investigate rather than touch. "You didn't answer," she said, because deflection was easier than honesty. "How did you know my grandmother?" He looked away, out into the gray. "By living long enough." The answer slid into her like a cold blade. The stranger's photograph, the one she had not yet seen, didn't exist for her yet, but something in his tone suggested a stretch between decades, a wire pulled taut. "Are you saying?" He shook his head. "I'm saying Evelyn was kind to lonely places. She understood them. She understood it." "How long have you been here, Daniel?" Emily's voice was softer. She wasn't sure why she matched the quiet in his. Perhaps she felt that if she raised her voice the room would split and the truth would spill out uncontrollably. He turned back to the lens, his reflection slicing into pieces across the facets. "Long enough to know that when Grayhaven warns you, it isn't bluster. It's courtesy. Courtesy tastes a lot like fear. Maybe fear is the politest thing we have." He gestured toward the service ladder that led to the gallery outside. "You should see it from the rail. The drop, the sea. It helps you understand why some things must be kept within walls." The gallery air was colder, the fog beating in small bright drops on the wrought iron. Wind pulled at Emily's sweater, sifting salt through the weave. From here, the cliff fell away in a reckless line, the rocks below like the teeth of a sleeping animal. For all its quiet, the place hummed. She felt it in the bones of the lighthouse, in the way the metal thrummed faintly under her hands, in the way Daniel stood beside her as if braced for a blow she couldn't see. "Does it scare you?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "That's how I know I'm not part of it." Emily looked at him fully. There was something disarming in his honesty, careful, but not ungenerous. She could feel the shape of a trust trying to form, like a shy creature approaching an outstretched hand. "My grandmother wrote journals," she said. "I don't have them. Not yet. But I think they're out there. Maybe in the house. Maybe hidden. She wanted me to find them." "She wanted you to find a way to say the thing she couldn't," he murmured. "Or to forgive her for not saying it." She didn't ask for forgiveness. Not asking can be its own request. A gust of wind rattled the glass behind them. Daniel stepped in closer, instinctively protective, and for an instant their shoulders brushed. Heat rayed out from the contact like light through fog. It wasn't dramatic, this small touch, but something in it felt dangerously necessary. Emily held very still, aware of him the way you are aware of a tide dragging at your ankles. You could keep standing, or you could let yourself be carried. He moved first, a fraction of an inch, an apology in the shift. "You should go," he said, and his voice sounded roughened. "Not just from here. From Grayhaven. I can't." "You can. You just don't want to." His eyes flicked down to her mouth and away so fast she might have imagined it. "That's always the trap, wanting." "Are you warning me as the lighthouse keeper?" Emily asked. "Or as Daniel?" His jaw worked. "Sometimes I can't tell the difference." They went back inside, the room instantly quieter without the wind. Daniel checked the burner with brisk efficiency, a man returning to a job because work is steadier ground than conversation. Emily watched his hands, the competence, the subtle grace of someone who had repeated motions so often they had worn grooves in him. She understood that there were grooves in her too, made by deadlines and grief and the need to know. At the base of the stairs, she paused. The logbook on the workbench had shifted a fraction, as if a draft had lifted its corner. But there were no drafts here, every crack had been caulked tight. She glanced at Daniel. He didn't seem to notice. She slid the book toward her, eyes scanning the entries, dates, weather notes, odd comments that looked like private shorthand. "Hum tonight, quiet in the west pane, 2 knocks. 2 knocks. She felt a prickle along her scalp. "What is this?" she asked. "Your notes." "Observations," he said. "If you listen, you hear patterns. If you write them down, you don't mistake one pattern for another." 2 knocks, she read aloud. "Like, on the door?" "On the glass," he said. He wiped his hands on a rag, not looking at her. "You can't knock on fog. But something tries." "You're teasing me." He met her gaze, expression unflinching. "I don't tease." A shiver slid down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She closed the logbook, suddenly aware of the weight of the room, the way it held more than air and machinery. "I'll come back," she said, because if she asked permission she suspected he would deny it. "To bring coffee. You look like you never leave this place." "Coffee would be a kindness," he said, and for the first time his mouth warmed into an actual smile, not broad, not practiced, but real. It landed in her chest with the foolish drama of a flare. Outside, the fog had thinned to a gauze. The path was less treacherous, the pines coughing up beads of water that fell like small, precise rain. Emily moved carefully, notebook tucked under her arm, mind racing. Daniel had given her very little, and yet everything had changed. The way he looked at the light. The way he said Evelyn's name without saying it. The way warning sounded like care when it left his mouth. Halfway down the cliff path, a flash of white under a needle-strewn shrub caught her attention. She crouched and pushed aside the branch. A small object rested in the damp earth, an old brass key, tarnished with green, its teeth strange and narrow. Tied to it with a thread that had long ago lost its color was a rectangle of paper sealed in wax. Wax that had been broken by time and damp, its edge crumbled away. On the paper, in ink that had bled at the edges, a neat, familiar hand had written a single letter. Her breath snagged. "Evelyn." Emily straightened slowly, the key cold as a coin in her palm. She turned it over and found a number stamped near the bow, *17*, and a small etched symbol she didn't recognize at first. A compass rose with a line through the west point. She had seen that mark before, she realized with a start, the same symbol embossed, half-faded, on the spine of one of the empty lockboxes in Evelyn's attic. Lockboxes that hadn't opened with any key her father had found after the funeral. A twig snapped somewhere to her left. Emily's head shot up. The path curved ahead, a soft bend framed by pines. To her right, the cliff fell away. To her left, the woods thickened into shadow. She held still, listening. The sea's breath was steady, the buoy told. There it was again, a light, deliberate step. "Hello," she called, hating the way fear makes the voice reach for politeness. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then the faintest exhale, a human sound smoothed by distance. She caught a hint of movement deeper in the trees, a darker gray within gray, an outline that could have been a person or the idea of one. The hairs along her arms lifted as if a current had slid through the air. She closed her fingers around the key and slid it into her pocket. "Who are you?" she asked louder now. "Why are you following me?" The shape froze, then dissolved into fog. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it. The path looked perfectly empty, innocent as a photograph. Then she smelled it, a trace of something like old smoke and winter air, an out-of-season scent that didn't belong. When she reached the bottom of the trail, the square opened before her in hushed daylight. The diner's windows were brighter, the hardware store's bell clinked as someone went in. Normalcy made a show of itself, as if to scold her for believing in shadows. Emily's heartbeat normalized in stages. Back at the Driftwood Inn, Mabel looked up from a crossword. "Oh," she said lightly, though her eyes sharpened as if they'd been expecting trouble to arrive hand in hand with Emily. "You look like you just saw the bill for a wedding you didn't attend." "I found a key," Emily said, laying it on the counter. "I think it's my grandmother's." Mabel's expression shuddered so neatly that Emily might have missed it if she weren't watching for it. "I see. Do you?" Emily asked. "Because I don't. What does the 17 mean?" Mabel wiped her palms on her apron and leaned in, lowering her voice even though the lobby was empty. 17 is a room number. Not here. Not anymore. The old Shoreline boarding house used to number its attic storage cubbies. Evelyn kept one there for a time. But that building's been closed for years. "Where is it?" "Down by the old cannery. The boards are rotted out. The mayor would string me up if she knew I sent you there." "I won't tell her," Emily said. "You just told me to have some place to put flowers is all." Mabel made the sign of the cross, half habit, half joke, then covered the key with her hand, pressing it back toward Emily. "I liked your grandmother," she said softly. "She helped when no one else did. And that's all I'm going to say. Helped who?" But Mabel had straightened, already shaking her head. "Room's ready for you whenever you want it." The Shoreline boarding house had given up on welcoming guests a decade ago, by the look of it. Its porch sagged toward the street as if exhausted from standing. Its windows were milky with salt. A chain-link fence ran along one side, a half-hearted attempt at keeping people out. Emily slipped through a gap, heart ticking in that familiar pattern. Fear braided with curiosity, the rhythm that had propelled her into danger and saved her more often than it should have. Inside, dust softened everything to a kind of peace. The lobby's wallpaper had peeled in long, curling tongues. The reception desk's bell had rusted to silence. A staircase led up to the second floor, its banister smooth with the polish of vanished hands. She climbed, avoiding the soft-looking boards, and found the narrow door to the attic at the end of the corridor. The attic smelled like old summer and mouse nests, but the air was dry. Light slipped in through a row of small windows under the eaves, strips of brightness laid across a field of shadow. Along one wall, a series of wooden cubbies stood in a grid, each marked with a painted number, most flaked down to ghostly suggestions. 17 was faint but legible. Its door was latched with a simple brass plate and, impossibly, a lock that wore the same compass rose mark with the slashed west point. The key slid in without argument. It turned with a soft, satisfying click, as if it had been waiting to perform this exact movement since the day it was cut. Emily held her breath and opened the door. Inside lay a thick, cloth-wrapped bundle and a tin box the size of a dictionary. She lifted both out, set them on the floor, and peeled back the cloth. Journals. 5 of them, bound in worn brown leather, the edges gilded long ago and thumbed into softness. Her hands shook a little, not with fear exactly, but with the dizziness of finally catching sight of the thing she'd been chasing in the corner of her eye. She opened the top journal. Evelyn's hand spilled across the first page, steady, precise, a voice she had missed without knowing it. June 12, 1979. I saw the light again tonight, though the Coast Guard says it's been dark for years. He told me not to look. I have never been good at not looking. Emily swallowed. She turned another page. July 2nd. He is kind, in that exacting way some men are. Kindness as structure rather than softness. I know it will hurt me. Another. August 14th. The thing in the glass is not a thing. It is a request. But love is also a request. I do not know how to answer both. Her throat burned. She reached for the tin box. It was heavier than it looked. The lid stuck for a moment, then gave with a sigh. Inside was a collection of photographs, some curled by time, their edges browned. She paused halfway through, breath snagging on an image that seemed to pull the air from the room. Evelyn young, hair curled by humidity, laughing at something out of frame. And beside her, a man with storm-gray eyes and the same mouth she had seen go careful around warnings. A man who looked like Daniel. A floorboard creaked behind her. Emily spun, heart jamming against her ribs. A silhouette stood in the attic doorway. A tall figure, hat brim shadowing the face. For half a second, the shape reassembled into something ordinary, just a trick of light and dust, a post, a coat on a peg. But then it moved with unmistakable human precision, and the air around it seemed to thicken as if made of cold breath. "Who are you?" Emily asked, voice threaded with ragged calm. The figure said nothing. It lifted an arm and, very gently, placed something on the floor just inside the doorway, a folded scrap of paper. Then it stepped back into the dimness without a sound that feet should make, the darkness swallowing its edges until there was only the empty frame of the door. Emily waited for her eyes to adjust. Nothing moved. The house creaked with the sigh of settling wood, the same sound old buildings have found comfort in for a century. She crossed to the threshold, knelt, and picked up the scrap. A few words, written in ink that looked fresh enough to smear, curved across the paper in a careful hand she didn't recognize. Don't look at him too long. The light has a way of keeping what it loves. Her hands went cold. She turned the paper over and found a penciled map on the back, a rough outline of Grayhaven's coast, a mark along the cliff path that matched the place where she'd found the key, and a second X closer to the lighthouse stairs. Beside the second mark, a single instruction: tonight. Wind plucked at the edges of the roof and the attic side. Emily gathered the journals and slid them back into their cloth, tucking the tin of photographs under her arm. She relocked the cubby, a reflex built more on habit than sense, and made her way down the stairs, every step chosen, every shadow noted, every breath measured. Outside, the fog had brightened, backlit by a pale sun. People moved along the pier in tiny, purposeful rhythms, shelling bait, coiling line, stacking crates. She cut back to the inn with the long strides of someone being followed by a thought. In her room, she spread the journals on the bed like a fan. Evelyn's voice rose from them in slices, this town's power of silence and kindness, the tides as timekeepers, rules that had more to do with mercy than safety. She read for an hour, then two, until the words began to blur and the light outside slipped toward evening. Each page lit a fuse to another question. Each answer turned toward Daniel like a compass needle that couldn't help itself. When she finally looked up, the room had dimmed to the blue before night. She stood, moved to the window, and parted the curtain. The lighthouse was a ghost on its headland. The shape of it calmed her in a way that startled her. She recognized the feeling with a shock, like spotting a person you pretend not to watch across a crowded room and being relieved they are still there. She turned to the journals, to the map, to the second X marked near the base of the lighthouse stairs. Tonight, that's it. A reckless instruction written with expectation. She thought of the key lying cool against her thigh, the photograph of Evelyn laughing at something only Daniel could have said, the way the lantern had woken like an eye-opening. She thought of Daniel's shoulder brushing hers, and the strict tenderness spoiling his warnings, and the way he had looked at her mouth for one lost second. Emily pulled on her coat. She tucked the smallest journal into her pocket, the one with August entries, and slid the map behind it. She locked her door out of habit, even though habit could not keep the things she feared from stepping through wood and fog. On the stairs, Mabel was refilling a vase with fresh hydrangeas, their petals the blue of deep summer. "Out again?" she asked, too casual. "Just for a walk," Emily said. Mabel's eyes dropped, as if reluctant to anchor to Emily's face in this particular moment. "There are walks you take to return to yourself," she murmured. and walks you take to lose what you can't keep. Which is this? Mabel shook her head. That depends on whether you look back. On the street, night rose from the ground up. Porch lights clicked on, shop windows glowed, the harbor thickened to black. Emily cut toward the path, sneakers whispering over damp needles. The buoy sounded its lonely note, and the wind lifted in the trees, carrying a smell like the first page of an old book. At the bend in the path marked on the map, she slowed. A thicket of low brush crowded the trail's edge, and within it a hollow of darkness that made the hairs on her forearms lift. She crouched, swept her hand gently into the shadows, and felt the scrape of wood against her fingers. Something small and rectangular lay under the brush, a weatherproof field box, the kind photographers used to stash batteries or notes. It opened on a simple latch. Inside lay a single object, a brass tag stamped with 2 lines, *Carter, and return to keeper, along with a coiled length of thin, wax string. The tag looked old, but the imprint of the letters was recent, as if someone had copied an earlier tag into now. Beneath it, under a folded strip of oilcloth, she found a sliver of paper with a spare message. * For what you took, take this. For what you will carry, tie it down, *. A twig cracked behind her. Emily straightened, heart launching into her mouth. The path behind her was empty, but the woods breathed as if something had just stepped sideways out of sight. She pocketed the tag, closed the box, and stood very still, listening for the precise sound of footsteps that didn't belong. Nothing. Only the sea, only the wind, only the hush of needles. She kept walking, slower now, all senses stretched. The lighthouse rose, dark as a closed eye. At its base, the stairs spiraled up from stone into shadow. Emily reached the first tread and paused, her hand on the rail. She expected her skin to register cold metal. Instead, the iron felt faintly warm, as if a palm had lifted from it moments before. Her breath caught. Someone was here. Or had been. Or wanted her to think so. She began to climb, footsteps muffled by the evening air. Halfway up, the door creaked open above her. Just a fraction, a question on a hinge. The light within was soft and amber, the kind of warmth a candle can give a church. She reached the landing, pushed the door, and stepped inside. The lantern room was unlit. The workbench lamp cast a circle of brightness across the logbook, the tools, and a steaming mug that sent up a ribbon of breath. Daniel stood by the window, half turned away, his profile cut from shadow. A sculpture of a man listening to something only he could hear. He didn't startle when she entered, which meant he'd heard her approach long before she reached the door. "You shouldn't be here at night," he said, still not looking at her. "Someone told me I should," she replied. "Someone who knows my name." "That's not the same as knowing you," he said softly. He turned then, and the darkness made his eyes look darker. The line of his mouth held nothing of a smile. "What did you find?" "Journals." She waited, watching his face absorb the word, watching it sting and settle. "Photographs." "Of me." "Not a question." "Of a man with your face," she said. "Taken decades ago." The lighthouse groaned, a small structural correction as the temperature shifted. Daniel set the mug on the table. "There are things you can't hold on to without them holding you back," he said. "You should leave those photographs where you found them." "I didn't." His jaw ticked once. "Of course you didn't." A sound rose from the glass, so faint she might have imagined it, like a fingertip dragged along the outside in a slow, circling march. Emily's skin prickled in waves. Daniel's head turned, precise as a weather vane catching a shift. The sound came again, a soft knock that seemed to hit behind the ears instead of in front of them. Then once more. 2 knocks. Emily's mind flashed to the logbook entry, to the thin script that had looked like superstition until it was not. The room tightened. She felt a single beat of Daniel's fear, controlled, practiced, not panicked but very real. He reached for the lantern shutter lever and paused, hand hovering, eyes on her as if to say, "Understand me before I do this." "What answers you if you answer it?" she whispered. "The thing that asks," he said. "And sometimes the thing you don't know you are." The knocks went quiet. The fog pressed in close, the window panes hazing with breath. For a heartbeat, Emily saw a shape where there should have been only her reflection and Daniel's. A third shadow, taller, the hat brim she'd seen in the boarding house, cut clean against the glass. It leaned in as if the glass were a veil between rooms, and even from here Emily felt the furnace pull of its attention. Daniel moved. He yanked the lever down, and the lantern flared with sudden, fierce light, cutting beams through the fog like blades drawn clean from sheaths. The third shape vanished, not startled so much as erased. The room flooded with gold and shadow, and the lens threw a geometry of fire across Daniel's face that made him look both younger and older, a man mapped by years and kept in place by duty. The light roared without sound. Emily knew, with a certainty that was neither logic nor faith but something more stubborn than both, that the night had not come for ships. It had come for them. For him. And now for her. "Tell me the rules," she said, because she needed something to hold on to. Daniel met her gaze over the bright heart of the lamp. "Don't look too long," he said. "Don't speak your true fear out loud. And if something calls your name from the glass." The lantern hissed, brighter, as if inhaling. From the pane to Emily's left, a sound like a voice rose from underwater, warped, close, intimate. It said her name. It said Emily. She didn't breathe. She didn't blink. The voice said her name again, and this time it wore a second shape, the sound she knew from phone calls, from holidays, from the last hospital room. It wore her grandmother's breath. "Emily," the voice said, "closer now, look at me." Her fingers dug into the rim of the workbench to stop herself from turning. Daniel's hand hovered near her elbow, not touching but ready. The light burned on, steady as a heart that refuses to fail. The voice said her name a third time. And somewhere in the trees below, as if the lighthouse had thrown a shadow of sound across the land, something moved with intent toward the stairs. She heard it in her bones even before her ears caught it, the certainty of approach. Daniel's eyes flicked to the door. "We're not alone," he said quietly. "And the light thinks it loves you." Emily set her jaw against the pull of the glass, against the ache of her grandmother's voice shaped by cold and memory. She looked at Daniel's face instead, at the lines the light drew there, at the steadiness he wore like an oath, and she inhaled a breath that hurt on its way in. "What happens," she asked, voice low and even, "if it decides to keep me?" The handle on the door turned, slow and deliberate, and the old hinges answered in a whisper. The first inch of dark yawned open. The light held its breath. And Emily, heart wild and throat steady, took one step toward the choice that would change everything. The door opened slowly, and Emily braced herself, every muscle taut. The lanterns blazed through long, trembling shadows across the spiral stairs, and for a heartbeat she thought the stranger would step into the light and reveal the face beneath the hat. But no one entered. The door inched wider, then stopped. Silence fell, heavy and deliberate. Daniel's hand lingered near her arm, not touching, but anchoring her all the same. His voice was low, threaded with iron. "It's Tessu. That's all this is tonight. A test." "Of what?" Emily whispered. "Of whether you'll answer." The words shivered through her, but the pressure in the room eased. The lantern hummed back to its steady rhythm, the light a measured heartbeat across the fog. Whatever had been outside the door had withdrawn, leaving only the slow creak of the stairs settling and the sound of their breathing. Emily exhaled, and Daniel reached past her to push the door closed. The lock clicked into place, final as a vow. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The lantern's glow bathed them in gold and shadow, and Emily could feel the fragile thread between them tighten. She wanted to ask more, about the voice that had borrowed her grandmother's breath, about the rules he'd spoken as if carved into his bones, about the stranger who stalked her steps. But her throat was dry, and the questions pressed against her chest like stones. Daniel broke the silence first. "You can't keep coming here," he said, though his tone had softened. "The more you give the lighthouse, the more it gives back. That's not a bargain anyone wins." "And yet you're still here," Emily said quietly. He looked at her, the weight of years in his eyes. "That's different." Emily almost asked how. But she was too afraid of the answer. She returned to the Driftwood Inn with the journals tucked beneath her coat. Mabel had long since gone to bed, but the lobby lamp burned low, filling the space with amber warmth. Emily slipped upstairs and spread the journals across her quilt, the leather covers cool under her fingers. She opened the first and read until her eyes ached. Evelyn's voice rose from the pages like smoke, precise, passionate, and unflinching. The entries painted a portrait Emily had never seen in life, her grandmother not as a stern matriarch, but as a young woman pulled between desire and fear. June 15, 1979. He warned me not to stay past sundown, but I lingered. The light came alive with a sound like breath. Daniel stood against it, calm, practiced. He belongs to it or it belongs to him. I can't yet tell which. Emily traced the words with her fingertip, heart thudding. There it was in ink, the confirmation she hadn't dared speak aloud. Daniel had been here, unchanged, since Evelyn's youth. She turned to another entry, dated weeks later. August 2nd. The voices are not always cruel. Sometimes they coax, sometimes they comfort. Tonight it spoke my name in my mother's voice. I almost answered. Daniel pulled me back, and for a moment I hated him for it. But I think he saved me. Emily closed her eyes. The echo of her own night pressed against her ribs. Evelyn had stood in this same place, felt the same pull, heard the same voices that preyed on grief and longing. And Evelyn, too, had turned to Daniel for rescue. The next morning, Emily walked the harbor streets with a stiffness in her shoulders that coffee couldn't shake. Every glance felt sharper, every whisper more pointed. The town knew she was circling the lighthouse, just as Evelyn had. And Grayhaven was a place where history did not fade, it repeated itself. At the diner, she slid into a booth with her notebook. The mayor sat across the room, pretending not to watch. Mabel's husband was at the counter, muttering to the cook about tides. Emily wrote down everything she could remember from the night before, the knocks, the voice, the fleeting silhouette in the glass. Her pen scratched furiously, as if capturing the details would anchor them in something rational. When she looked up, she saw him. Daniel, standing across the street, coat collar turned against the wind, eyes on her through the fogged glass. He didn't move, didn't signal, just stood like a fixed point in the mist. Emily's pulse kicked. Something in his stillness unsettled her more than the stranger's shadow. She pushed her notebook closed, left money on the table, and went out to him. "You watch me," she said, breath clouding in the cool air. "Someone has to." His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. "You've got a way of walking into things you can't walk back out of. You sound like you know that from experience." "I do." His eyes flicked past her shoulder, to the mayor's gaze through the diner window. "They won't help you. They're too afraid. But they'll watch you burn if it means the fire keeps them warm." Emily swallowed. "And you? Will you help me?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded once. "If you'll listen." "I'll listen," she said, though a part of her already knew listening wouldn't be enough. That evening, they sat in the lantern room as fog swallowed the coast. Daniel spread the logbooks across the workbench, thick volumes filled with his meticulous notes. "Patterns," he said. "That's how you survive here. You learn the rhythms, you chart them, you know when to step back and when to stand still." Emily flipped through pages of scrawled entries. 2 knocks, West Pane. Voice at 3:14. Lantern flared without oil. Stranger on the stairs. The note stretched back decades, though the handwriting never wavered. "You've been keeping watch this long?" she asked, voice hushed. Daniel nodded. "The Hale line has always been keepers. But I've outlasted them all." "And Evelyn?" For a moment his face softened. "She wanted to save me from it. Or maybe she wanted to save herself. Love can't tell the difference sometimes." The confession sat between them like a fragile flame. Emily felt heat rise in her chest, though she didn't know if it was jealousy, grief, or something more dangerous. She closed the logbook and looked at him, really looked at him. The quiet strength, the exhaustion that lived in his eyes, the tenderness he tried to bury beneath warning. She thought of Evelyn's words, "He belongs to it or it belongs to him," and she wondered which of them she was beginning to belong to. That night the storm came. Rain lashed the cliffs, waves hammered the rocks, and the lighthouse groaned as if resisting the sea itself. Emily stood with Daniel in the lantern room, watching the beam cut jagged paths through the blackness. The voices came louder now, carried on the wind, layered and insistent. They spoke her name, Evelyn's name, Daniel's. They promised warmth, safety, forever. They promised love. Emily gripped the rail, torn between terror and longing. Daniel stood beside her, hands braced, face carved with both defiance and sorrow. "Don't answer," he said, voice firm. "No matter what it offers. Don't." And then, through the sheets of rain, Emily swore she saw it. A second figure in the lantern chamber, standing just beyond Daniel's shoulder. A figure of shadow and light, too solid to be a trick of the glass. Her breath caught. Daniel didn't move. The figure lifted a hand, palm out, as if in greeting. Emily's heart pounded. The storm roared. And she realized the past wasn't gone. It was here. It was alive. And it wanted her. The storm had quieted by morning, leaving Grayhaven draped in damp silence. The sea stretched out flat as slate, as though it had never risen in fury, though driftwood and broken planks scattered along the harbor told the truth. Emily walked the pier with Evelyn's smallest journal tucked inside her coat pocket, the words from the night before still rattling in her skull. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes she saw it, that shadow in the lantern chamber, hand raised as if in greeting, as if in claim. She wanted to tell herself it had been a trick of stormlight, some reflection bent by the glass. But Daniel hadn't denied it when she gasped. He had simply turned the lantern brighter, steady as stone, as if holding the apparition at bay was just another part of his duty. Now, in daylight, Emily felt both foolish and raw. The town seemed unchanged, yet each window she passed felt like an eye, each step like a sound too loud. Grayhaven didn't approve of questions. And she was asking more than anyone had dared in decades. She cut down toward the beach where the fog still clung, low and heavy. Driftweed lay tangled with ropes and shells, gulls picking at the debris left by the storm. It was there she saw him. A figure stood at the tide's edge, hat brim pulled low, coat dark with mist. The stranger. Her pulse jolted, but curiosity steadied her feet. She walked closer, her boots sinking into wet sand. "Who are you?" she called, the sea stealing the sharpness from her voice. The stranger did not answer. He crouched, as if searching the surf for something, then straightened when she drew within 10 paces. His face was hidden in shadow, though daylight lay across him. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded photograph. Without a word, he extended it. Emily hesitated, then stepped forward and took it. The paper was soft with age, the edges curled. When she opened it, her breath caught. Her grandmother Evelyn stood smiling in the frame, hair curled by wind, cheeks flushed with youth. Beside her was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, gray-eyed. "Daniel." Emily's fingers trembled. The photo was decades old. Yet Daniel looked unchanged, down to the set of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. No older. No younger. The same. She lifted her gaze, but the stranger was already walking away, his boots leaving no impression in the sand. "Wait," she called, running a few steps. "What does this mean?" He stopped just long enough to turn his head, though the shadow never left his face. His voice was low, rough as stones turned in the tide. "The light doesn't keep ships safe. It keeps something else inside." Then he vanished into the fog, swallowed whole, as if the beach had never known him. Emily stood trembling, the photograph clutched in her hand, the sea licking at her boots. Her grandmother had loved him. The same man who now watched her with storm-gray eyes, the same man who warned her night after night. And if the stranger spoke true, then the lighthouse wasn't just a beacon. It was a prison. The storm rolled in at dusk, as if summoned. The horizon boiled black, the wind tore across the harbor, and the sea rose in white-tipped fury. Grayhaven battened its windows, tied its boats, and prayed in silence. But Emily didn't join them. She was already on the cliff path, Evelyn's journal pressed against her chest, the photograph of Daniel and her grandmother burning in her pocket like a secret that refused to stay hidden. By the time she reached the lighthouse, rain lashed sideways, needling her skin. The tower loomed above, lantern dead, stone trembling under the assault of waves. Yet light flickered faintly behind the glass, as though something inside had already woken. She pushed the door and stumbled in, hair plastered to her face, lungs burning. Daniel was there. Standing at the base of the stairs, lamp in hand, eyes storm gray as ever. He looked at her as if he had known she would come. Perhaps he had. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low but steady, carrying above the wind. "You said that the first night," Emily shot back, pulling the photograph from her coat. Her hand shook as she held it up. "Explain this. Explain how you look the same now as you did with her." The flame in his lamp guttered. He didn't reach for the photo. Didn't flinch. He only closed his eyes, as though the truth had waited too long and finally demanded breath. "Evelyn wasn't the first. She won't be the last. The light, it binds me. It keeps me here as keeper, as prisoner. Time doesn't pass for me the way it does for you. Not while I stand watch." Emily's heart pounded. "And you let her love you anyway." "I tried not to. I warned her. Just like I've warned you." His voice broke for the first time, quiet and rough. "But love doesn't listen to rules. Not hers. Not mine. Not yours." The lighthouse groaned, and a deep hum filled the air. The lantern above ignited, searing bright, cutting through the storm. Shadows writhed along the walls, stretching like grasping hands. Voices swelled, layered and insistent, each one promising warmth, belonging, forever. Evelyn's voice rose among them, clearer than the rest. Emily, stay. Stay, my darling. Emily staggered, clutching the railing. The light wasn't just shining, it was reaching, pulling. She felt it thread through her veins, tugging at her grief, her loneliness, her yearning for answers. It wanted her. Daniel seized her shoulders, steadying her. "Don't listen. The light doesn't love, it consumes." "Then why are you still here?" she demanded, rain dripping from her lashes, voice cracking. "Because someone has to be," he said simply. "Someone has to keep it contained." The storm screamed through the tower, glass rattling in their frames. The voices grew louder, overlapping until they were unbearable. Emily pressed her hands over her ears, but still they seeped in. Evelyn, her father, long-gone friends, promises she had never heard but desperately wanted to believe. Daniel pulled her closer, his forehead nearly against hers. "You have to choose, Emily. Destroy it and I'll be freed, but so will what it holds. Or take my place. Bind yourself to the light. Keep Grayhaven safe, but lose the rest of your life." Her chest heaved. Two choices, each ruinous. Freedom with danger loosed upon the world. Or eternity, chained beside him in a prison of glass and flame. Lightning cracked, thunder shattering the sky. The lantern blazed brighter still, and for an instant Emily saw it, the thing inside the light. Not shadow, not voice, but something vast and hungry, pressing against the glass like a sea against a ship's hull. Beautiful, terrible, eternal. Her grandmother's voice whispered again, soft and pleading. "I tried. I failed. But you can stay. You can keep him. You can keep us. Emily's tears mingled with the rain. She turned to Daniel, saw the weight in his eyes, the years carved there without aging. And in that heartbeat she knew he hadn't asked her for freedom. He had asked her for company. Her hand closed around the journal in her pocket. Her voice shook, but it was steady enough. "No more cycles," she said. "No more secrets." She pulled the oil-soaked rag from the workbench, hurled it into the flame, and drove the iron lever down. The lantern flared, then shattered with a deafening crack, shards raining like stars. The light screamed, not sound, but sensation, a pressure tearing through marrow and memory. The storm outside howled in answer, waves colliding against stone. Daniel cried her name, reaching for her, but the force pulled them both, as if the lighthouse itself had split and poured its heart into them. For a moment Emily saw everything. Evelyn on these stairs, the stranger waiting at the shore, Daniel across decades, each choice rippling into the next. Then the light collapsed inward, folding like a dying star, until only darkness remained. Silence followed. Heavy, absolute. When Emily opened her eyes, The lantern chamber was cold. The glass lay shattered, the flame extinguished. The storm outside had gone still, the sea calm as slate once more. She stood alone. Daniel was gone. Or perhaps not gone, only kept elsewhere, bound in a place she could no longer see. The journals at her side fluttered once, then stilled, their pages blank in the darkness. Grayhaven awoke the next morning to a lighthouse silent and dead. No lantern, no keeper. Just a tower of stone watching the sea. Some swore they saw a figure in the window that night, a woman's silhouette against the stars. Others said the cliffs whispered her name when the fog was thick. Emily Carter had come to Grayhaven seeking answers. She left behind a story the town would never dare tell.